Hello and welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Our guest is Cauvery Madhavan, an author, journalist, and blogger based in Ireland. My name is Neil Parekh. I'm the guest host for this week. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and our Digimentors website. Please like, comment, share, retweet. For everyone watching on replay, thank you so much for taking the time to come back to this very important and educational discussion. We're also going to have some fun. So if you are watching later, feel free to drop a comment. And if you mention me, I'll make sure to come in and reply to your question and thoughts. We are looking forward to a great show today. Our guest, Cauvery Madhavan, is an author, among other things. She has a new book out, The Inheritance. We'll talk to her about that. We'll also talk about what it's like to be Indian living in Ireland. What is the experience of, what has been her experience living there? We'll also be talking a little bit about, we'll look at the Irish Times, looking at coverage of Ireland in the New York Times recently. But we'll also talk about the education system in India, history education in particular. Fascinating discussion about what gets remembered and what's not remembered in our cultures, in our lives. So stay tuned and buckle up for a great ride. Again, let us know where you're watching from. If you're watching on Facebook in particular, make sure you press play on the video so that we see your comments and that we can potentially put them on air. Thank you again for joining us Sunday morning on the East Coast, Sunday afternoon in Ireland. A few folks who are watching, we have Patricia Freudenberg watching on YouTube under Miss You Graham. She's also watching on Facebook. Thank you so much, Patricia. Always great to have you join the show. Jonathan is watching from the East Village. Thank you, Jonathan. And my mom is saying hi from Hastings-on-Hudson, New York, where I grew up. Hi, Mom. Always good to see you. Thank you for watching all of our shows. Thank you for telling your friends to watch. We really appreciate it. And we will, I'll see you soon. I think it's not this weekend, next weekend, I will be up in New York. Details to come. And that's like a little bit of an accountability measure, right? Everyone knows that I'm going to see my mom eventually. So I better do it, I guess. And Patricia is offering congratulations and welcome to Cauvery. We're so glad that she's with us today. We first started, she started watching the show several months ago, and we reached out and said, hey, would you consider being a guest? And I think she didn't hesitate for one moment. We'll double check that when we bring her on the show. But she's been great, a great supporter and great friend of the show, watching, commenting on Twitter, etc. Our friend Stephen Kaplan is joining us from Ramsey, New Jersey. And good morning to the New York Times Read Along fam. Thank you very much, Stephen. Doug Levy is watching from the Los Angeles area this time, and it's apparently way too hot for a San Franciscan. Doug, thank you as always for watching 5:30 a.m. Pacific time. As a long time, not old, watch my language, a long time radio guy. Doug is up early in the morning and is always glad to spend when he has a chance to spend his Sunday morning with us. So we are going to dig right in. We're going to look at what's in the paper for a little bit and then come back and welcome Cauvery to the show. So let's go ahead and bring up our New York Times cam and make that full screen. And again, make sure that you let us know where you're watching from and share, comment, retweet, tag your friends, do all the things on social media to make sure that you that folks have a chance to watch the show. And I will ask for your help. Let me know if there are any audio issues. I am using a different mic this time, so I need to move it a little bit closer to the paper. I'll keep an eye on the comments in case we have any issues on that regard. So let's go ahead and check out what's on at least the front page of every section so that we have a sense of what's going on. We will turn to that in just a second. There we go. And there we go. So the front page, the display story, is the headline, Gambia banned female cutting, but she didn't stop. This is the headline right there. A decade after her country's ban on female genital mutilation, a grandmother named Yassine Fati, 96, became the first Gambian cutter to be convicted. The lead story, of course, a rehearsal stage and some improv ahead of debate. Campaign strategized. Trump is peppered on the issues as Harris plans for attacks. Russian cash and influence on influencers. U.S. says Kremlin was steering messaging. And a story out of Georgia, which just broke my heart when I saw it a couple of days ago. 4 people were killed in another school shooting. And overnight, there was another shooting in Kentucky as well, near the interstate. But this is an interesting technique that the prosecutors are using. They are they're going after the parents, and they did this in Michigan first, and they're going after the father in this case as well. Some U.S. Open tennis news. This interesting article, keeping courtside order in a sea of affluence. So this is all about the stadium workers who are, having to exert some pressure on folks who are in the audience, when they get back to their seats, holding them until the right moment, etc. I know our friend Stefan Kaplan was at the U.S. Open a few, days ago, earlier. Let us know what your experience was like, Stefan. Curious if you, particularly with this article, what your experience was like with the ushers. And then this picture on the right-hand side, top of the heap in New York, finally, after losing last year's championship match. Arina Sabalenka of Belarus, the world number 2, claimed her first U.S. Open singles title on Saturday. As is usually the case, and I'm not a huge tennis fan, I'll follow it, but if I'm not mistaken, the finals, is the men's finals today? Hopefully someone can check me on that and let me know. And we can always give updates during the show. The Sunday opinion section, how falling in love with an AI could spell the end of democracy. As you know, Sri is doing lots of workshops on AI. That'll be interesting to take a look at. College students will never grow up if universities keep infantilizing them. I paid my child to read a book. It was the best $100 I've ever spent. That's a really interesting. My Pam read that earlier in the week. We've talked about it. We can't imagine the idea of paying our child, at least, to read. We'd almost have to pay her not to read. She will read. When she was younger, she would be getting her shoes on to go out, and she'd be sitting in the hallway in front of the closet reading a book instead of putting her shoes on. So that's an interesting thought. Curious what other parents think about that. The cover of the Sunday opinion, you see the confetti, and then the bottom, how the White House was won. It's November 6, 2024. Interesting. Ross Douthat imagines how an uncluttered agenda earned Kamala Harris the presidency. David Brooks examines how Democrats' failure to listen to voters returned Donald Trump to office. Nightmare scenario if there ever was one. But that is the opinion section. Business is a article about Bob Iger, how he undermined his hand-picked successor and snatched back the top job at Disney. Sunday Styles, Ibrahim Kamara, I'm guessing on the pronunciation, filling big shoes, brings his version of Off-White to New York for Fashion Week. As a brand advances, influences merge. Sports, the focus is on football, NFL preview. That's U.S. football, not football, as folks in Ireland probably not with the accent, but at least football in the rest of the world is, of course, soccer. So we won't spend too much time on that. Here's a great arts and leisure. He's not giving up the ghost. Michael Keaton on the success, comebacks, and his newest movie, Beetlejuice. And it's hard to see the full picture there. I'll try and fold it a little differently. You see a little bit more of his face. We actually saw Beetlejuice yesterday with Emily and a friend of hers. We watched the original movie like a week ago so that she could catch up. The book review, Consider the Horse, several books about horses. And the New York Times Magazine, Stop Making Sense. America must free itself from the tyranny of the penny. How many pennies do you have lying around? Do you keep pennies? Do you use pennies? Is there any other use for pennies out there? We'll have to figure that out. We'll put the paper back together and set it aside for just a moment. But that's the quick review. And there we go, our first fail for the morning. Sorry about that. It's an external microphone I have and didn't carry it with me back to the table. Again, we are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Digimentors website. Our guest is Cauvery Madhavan. We'll bring her on in just a second. Just want to say hi to a few more folks watching. Ken Fisher watching from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I'm filling in the blanks, Ken. Paula Kiger is in Connecticut, Meriden, Connecticut. I know she just met with Rose Horowitz, one of our close friends in Connecticut. I think it was in Milford. Paula, Meriden is close to my heart. I went to school at Wesleyan University, as did Pam, just nearby Meriden. Meriden was actually the train stop for us in Connecticut. So great to see you there. Naomi is watching. Salutations from the fall-like Upper West Side. We were out yesterday and it got cool. It was like 63 degrees outside. We were very surprised. Sujana Chandrasekhar, Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar is saying, wishing us a good morning. Thank you, Sujana. Patricia just said she loved Beetlejuice. Yeah, we loved the movie as well. And we have our first comment about the news. Jonathan says pennies go into coin rolls and get carted over to the bank to be converted into other currency. I honestly don't even know that I have pennies come through my fingers anymore. I haven't. I can't remember the last time I've played with pennies. So thank you for sharing that, Jonathan. Now it is time to bring on our guest, Cauvery Madhavan, author, journalist, and blogger. Her books include The Inheritance and Paddy Indian, and of course the Uncoupling and the Tainted as well. We couldn't fit everything on the card, unfortunately, but we will show you the covers in a little bit. Please welcome to the show, Cauvery Madhavan. Cauvery.
Hi, Neil.
You're
morning.
here. Good morning.
I must say a big hello to your mom, Mrs. Parekh.
My mom, exactly. Thank you for the hello. It's a family. The New York Times Read Along family. For folks who don't know, my mom is watching from Hastings on Hudson, from the house I grew up in. So thank you, Mom. So Cauvery, I want to go back to I can't remember when you first started watching the show, how you found us. Do you remember? It was earlier this spring, if I'm not mistaken, or is it further back?
Yeah, I absolutely do remember, because it was John Lee and Martin Nutty from the the Irish Global Network who put me on to alerted me to your show, and that's how I started watching. Yeah.
And I remember you started watching, you started commenting on Twitter. You've been always been great about sharing our show, not just this show, but also the mental health show that I host. Thank you so much for all of your support and encouragement over the last couple months.
At all. I found every episode so interesting and so varied and diverse. I've really enjoyed watching. So I'm just so excited to be on the show finally myself.
Well, that's great. That's great. And hopefully your friends are watching as we go through, and we've seen comments come in from folks. If there's someone that please let us know. Give them a shout out. Let us know how you're connected
Okay.
with them.
Okay.
So just to give people some basic background, tell us a little bit about your journey. You came to Ireland, I think you said when you were 23 years old, and
That's
you've
right.
been there ever since. Tell us, what is it like to be Indian living in Ireland?
Yeah, Neil, I came to India when I came to Ireland when I was 23, and I'm now 62. So, I've lived all my adult life in Ireland, and I basically grew up in Ireland, really, as an adult. And what is it like living in Ireland? It's not hugely different from living in India if you just leave out the number of people and the extreme urban life that most people would have in India. But it was easy to assimilate, very easy to integrate, because Irish people and Indian people have huge similarities in their culture. They're both countries absolutely obsessed with religion, and even if you're a non-practicing Hindu or a non-practicing Catholic, there is still bits of your your religious family life that filter into your life. And then there's a great love for family in both the cultures, and food, food and drink, getting together with your family. Those are all big deal in both the countries. And so we never felt totally different, because when I first met for example, when I first met my neighbors in Ireland, uh, you know we would have very similar conversations. Like, she might be moaning and groaning about her mother-in-law or her brother-in-law, or maybe she was great friends with her sister-in-law. And and the whole thing about family and what will people say, and my children, educating them, giving them a good giving them a good start in life. Very, very similar values. So it wasn't a huge change in that way. you know and yeah, it's easy because of that, because of the similarities.
Sure. And one of the things that you mentioned to me was, you know, different than the experience, at least in the U.S., in terms of immigration, right? Like when immigration was opened up in the 60s and early 70s, of course, the focus was on professionals.
Mm.
They were looking for doctors and engineers, lawyers, etc. And then, they opened up immigration, and there was family unification, and people were able to sponsor relatives, etc. That's the experience here in the U.S. The experience in Ireland was a little bit different, right, in terms of who was allowed to come in.
Yeah, because in Ireland, working visas. I mean, you can't come to Ireland with no intention to work, unless you're seeking asylum or you're a refugee. So if you're coming, you're coming on a working visa, and depending on what country you come from, there are only certain sectors of the economy that where you can work and get a working visa. So if you're coming from India, you're more than likely to get a working visa in the medical field, or in IT, or pharmaceuticals. So it's quite restricted and quite restrictive. um, that doesn't mean that you can't bring your family. I mean, you of course you can bring your family, but just in terms of the kind of people that are here, the kind of Indians that are in Ireland tend to be professional people. So it's a different. I think it's a different experience, as an immigrant then.
Interesting, very very interesting. So let's go ahead, and we want to make sure that we focus on your books and your authorship. I want to make sure that folks see, in terms of the earlier books you had, the Uncoupling, Paddy Indian, and the Tainted, which some really great in terms of cultural works, looking at Indian and Irish culture. But this new book is a little bit different. You have your newest book is The Inheritance. I have it right here, the review copy. Thank you very much. First question I have, just to clarify for our viewers, it's out now in bookstores, or coming out soon in Ireland?
It's
But
out now.
it's out now. Is it out everywhere in the
Yeah.
US as well? The
Well, in the
Amazon
US,
date.
yeah, you can in the US you can buy it on Amazon and you can buy it on Kindle straight away. You can download it on Kindle straight away.
Okay. I was curious because the Amazon date had a December publishing date on it in the US.
I have no idea why. I must actually clarify that with my publishers. But it's available to buy online and to download online as well.
So. Okay, that's good. I just want to make sure that folks know. So some of the reviews, the early reviews, Donald Ryan, I just finished The Inheritance. It is so beautiful. My heart was beating out of my chest as they searched for Sully at the end. And as he emerged from the ivy, I shouted, "Oh, thank God," out loud. I absolutely loved this novel. Graham Norton, a story brimful of love and the power of forgiveness. I loved seeing West Cork through Cauvery's eyes. I hope it is a huge success. And Namita Gokhale, director of the Jaipur Lit Festival, which we'll talk about in just a moment, the geographical and historical vista of this extraordinary novel is breathtaking. The Inheritance holds the past and the present in its embrace through its intertwined narratives. It evokes the lilt and landscape of Beara and carries a cast of unforgettable characters. A book to be read and reread and cherished. Wow. Just wow. Tell us about The Inheritance, Cauvery.
I have to pinch myself sometimes when I read the reviews because many of the people who reviewed the book are my literary heroes, especially Donald Ryan. So I mean, when he so generously read my book, and because writers are so short of time, and people like him do get loads and loads of books to read. So I was absolutely chuffed when he read it and then gave me such a wonderful quote. To tell you about the Inheritance, well, it's set in 1980 in the Beara Peninsula, which is in the southwest of Ireland, and it's set at a time where a lot of young men in Ireland were leaving Ireland because it was a time of terrible depression and there weren't any jobs. And my main character is a young man of London Irish stock, and he inherits a house in the Beara Peninsula and comes to Ireland at a time when all other young men are leaving. And it's what happens to him once he arrives. And I have, woven a thread from 400 years ago into the story. And that's the story of O'Sullivan Bear, who was one of the last chiefs to hold out against the English. He was holed up in the forest in Glengarriff for about 2 years, and then finally had to make an escape, and he and his clansmen left the southwest of Ireland and did a 16-day march in the middle of winter all the way to the north of Ireland to Leitrim. And of the 1,300 or 1,400 people who left, only 35 arrived alive. So I've just woven that, a bit of that story into the story in the present.
Wow. One of the questions that came up right away, Patricia asking what genre is it? So certainly fiction with a little bit of a history.
Yeah, I mean, right? I wouldn't categorize it, Patricia, as entirely as historical fiction because it is set in the present. And having said that, apparently nowadays, anything that's set 40 years ago becomes historical. I find that just unbelievable. Because if you're 62 years old, that means half your life is now history. So, but yes, I mean, I would just call it a contemporary. It's a contemporary fiction with a historical thread running through.
Yeah. On that issue of kind of what's historical and what's not, the other way that, at least here in the States, cars that are 40 years old get a vintage license plate on it, right? And that's really scary for me because I remember seeing these cars on the road when they were new. They can't be vintage cars. I mean, for me, when I was, I mean, it's a perspective, right? I think of myself when I was like 10 years old in the 80s and in middle school, high school, 40 years ago, right? Would have been like 1944.
Yeah.
And now 40 years ago is, I don't want to talk about it.
It's like, whenever I'm invited to an Indian function where there might be other Indians, and suddenly somebody starts calling you Auntie G, then you think, oh,
Yes, yes.
I'm truly vintage now.
It starts. A few more folks to welcome to the show as we are still in the early part of the show. It's Patricia says she agrees that New York Times Read Along is an awesome show with rich conversations raising awareness on global world news. Sujana said that she had actually went to Ireland this summer for the first time.
Oh, wow.
And just lovely people and places. Can't wait to go back. And my mom says the name, there's a Cauvery River in India.
Yeah.
And a song. Were you named after the river specifically, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I was named after the river because my mother is from an area called Coorg. It's a district in the state of Karnataka. They're a very distinct community, quite separate from anything else and anybody else in India. And my grandmother came from the village Bagamandla, where the river Kaveri has its source. So that's
Great.
why I was Kaveri.
Great. And apparently there's a song as well. Our friend Martin says, morning, delighted to see one of my favorite writers as a guest. Cauvery has a unique perspective on both Ireland, India, and their collective places in the world. Cauvery, you're friends with Martin? You know Martin? Or no?
I know Martin, and I know John, his co-presenter on the Irish Stew podcast so well.
Yes.
And I just love the connections that John and Martin make on the podcast, and a lot of those connections actually last a good while because guests on the show keep in touch with other guests. It's quite an interesting dynamic. I mean, for example, I'm on your show because of them.
Yes.
So,
yes.
I'm just delighted that both are here today listening in.
And I know John in particular did a great job of helping to promote this show, sharing it several times on Twitter. Sri, and this is and we all, it comes together. Sri is very close friends with folks. There's a sober St. Patrick's Day celebration here in New York. He has a very close group of Irish friends here, and we've worked with them in the past. So it all comes full circle, which is nice.
Yeah, and I think that's such a mark. It's a very Irish trait, to network, to keep in touch, to give a helping hand, to help people upwards as you're going up, not kicking the ladder behind you. That's a very, very Irish thing.
Dr. Tachi is watching from Fort Lauderdale. Dr. Tachi, thank you so much. Rose is watching from Connecticut. Rose Horowitz, another writer. Thank you, Rose. Deborah Bernick is watching from DC. Great weather all week. Deborah Bernick lives just about 15, 20 minutes from where I am. And I am honored that Ambassador Srinivasan, Sri's father, is watching, trying to catch up. Thank you so much, Uncle. Sri is actually traveling back. He's literally on a plane at this moment, coming back from Oslo. He was there for the Nobel Peace Center conference. He's on the outreach board for the Nobel Peace Prize. They did a big conference last week that he helped to co-host, focus on Nargis Mohammadi from Iran, Free Nargis Coalition they had launched there. So that's why Sri isn't with us today. And then our friends at the Irish Stew podcast, thank you for the shout out. So thank you for all of your support. And yes, Uncle, Sri is literally in the plane at this moment. So it was unfortunate that in terms of the timing, but I am thrilled that I get to be the guest host. I'm always happy to step in. I've said this before, but I've been working with Sri now. We've done the show. He's done this show for almost 9 years. In October, it'll be 9 years. And I joined him about 7 years ago or so. And I still remember the day that he gave me his Facebook password and said, I can't do the show this weekend. We're traveling. I just can't change things. I don't want to lose the momentum. Log in as me and host the show, which, like, for someone like Sri to give you his credentials and say, I trust you with my baby. I still get goosebumps thinking about that. It's always an honor and a privilege to sit in the chair, as he calls it, in the big chair, But of course, I feel like an octopus because I have 3 computers going and I have the paper over here and I knocked over the microphone. But it's always a pleasure and an honor. So thank you. Thank you so much. So let's get back to the Tainted. Tell us a little bit about the writing process. This is now your 4th book, right? Did this come, was this easier to write than the others? Is this something that you've been working on for a while and you just kind of sat down and wrote it over a few months? What was the process of bringing this to life?
So all my books, every one of my books, Neil, I always start with really good intentions of being, regular, doing a bit of writing every single day. I always have good intentions, and then things fall apart for me always, because I'm a huge procrastinator, and I just can't help it. And sometimes it's the fear of, the fear of writing. The fear of stalling actually makes you stall. It's just completely nutty. So for all the books that I've written so far, and in fact, all of the writing I do, my feature writing, whatever I do, my process is quite chaotic, in that, I tend to think a lot without actually putting anything down on paper. So I'd be researching it, I'd be looking it up, I'd be, planning a whole lot of stuff and actually not putting anything down on paper. So it's not a great way to write, but somehow it has worked for me. And I don't think it'll work for me forever, because at some point I might just have a stroke or something, with the anxiety of not having actually, meeting my deadlines and all of that. So, but at the same time, once I actually get going, it's fine. So for me, I don't plot any of my books, my novels, and I have never been plotted. And I tend to write by what a lot of writers would call writing by headlight. So it's like driving a car. The first 100 meters are lit on a dark road, and that's how a lot of writers who don't plot would write like that. But that also means that you end up being quite surprised yourself, because sometimes what you think when you sit down in the morning to write, for example, in this book, The Inheritance, I have an older English couple who just literally just arrived on the page on the day, and I remember telling my husband in the evening, I have no idea what's happened. This English couple has just arrived in the book, and so I think when you don't plot, you can surprise yourself and let the story find its own story and the people in it find its own voice. But everybody's different. Every writer is different. So that's the way I am. I'm kind of more chaotic, less organized, and it's just worked for me. So
yeah, that's good. That's good. I'm glad that's worked. In addition to your books, of course, you're also a journalist. You've written for the Irish Times, among others. What's the process of writing? How would you describe the process of writing for different platforms, between your journalism and blogging, your books, etc.?
Yeah. So after my second book, Neil, I actually got, I had a column. I had a weekly column in a daily evening paper called the Evening Herald. And I wrote that column for 7 years. It came out every Saturday. I had a completely free hand. I could write whatever I wanted and comment on anything I liked. So it was such a huge opportunity for me. But as a result of that, I found it very hard to write my novel. The novel that was being planned, and that I had to write, which was The Tainted. And that was because with when you're writing for a paper, especially if you're writing a column, you literally have to read every paper going, the national papers, international papers, local papers, because if you're writing an opinion column, you have to have an opinion, and in order to have an opinion, you have to have read. So it was hugely time consuming, and luckily for me, the column itself ran its life out, and I stopped writing for the paper, but I sort of occasionally write feature pieces and opinion pieces, over the last few years, and it's a completely different, it's a completely the process is so different because obviously you're working to a very tight deadline. It could be 10 days or just a week. And, you know, you're restricted. Obviously you're restricted, you know, you have maybe 800 words or 1,000 words. So it's a completely different process, and it kind of is quite intense. And what I do normally is, like, if whatever number of days I have, I would reserve 3/4 of it to research and then 1/4 of it to write. So that's how I work.
Interesting. We talked about our friend John Lee earlier. He actually tweeted before we started, coffee brewing, New York Times at hand, ready for our Irish stew cast friend Cauvery Madhavan with Neil Parekh on the latest episode of Sri's New York Times read along, about to go live across social media. What a great tweet to set up the show to encourage people to watch. And in addition to the comments that he's sharing on Twitter, he did actually jump into Facebook to share this, that your voice, your work is included in Epic Museum's Looking East, Ireland and India exhibit. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, that was just such a, I can't even tell you what a huge honor it was to be asked to be part of that exhibition, because that exhibition, which is running at the moment in Ireland in the Epic Museum is really famous, and it's one of the most visited museums in Europe. And the Epic Museum is dedicated to Irish immigration. And this particular exhibition, Looking East, is about 300 years of Irish people in India. So it was a fantastic exhibition to be involved in, and you know, I'm a video exhibit in the exhibition. Yeah, it was a real honor to be part of that. I mean, I can't tell you how exciting it was.
Well, that's great. Let's talk about Irish in India for just a moment, because this will lead into a conversation. You wrote an article about you know, a few years ago now. This is 2022, after Leo Varadkar became the head of government in Ireland. I'm going to ask you to help me with the pronunciation. He returned to the office of
Taoiseach.
Taoiseach. See, I would not have found that, would not have gotten that right. But this incredible article, two men of Indian heritage lead their nations a century after Irish freedom and 70 years since India cast off the Raj. And this is you know, the graphic they used, some Irish colors with their pictures and their headshots. In this article, you wrote about, in part, the role that the Irish played in India during the British colonial rule. But I want to actually focus on this specific excerpt, and I'm going to make the text bigger. What's remarkable is how the collective memories of being colonized differ between India and Ireland. Ireland's diaspora in these past centuries comprised survivors who were able to leave Ireland. The Great Famine, again, I'm going to skip over the pronunciation, is known of throughout the world because these survivors and their descendants never let their story and their nation's sorrow be forgotten. Indians, on the other hand, were far more wretched, but they never had the opportunity or ability to leave during times of colonial famine, and died in their millions in their villages and towns, many more millions than ever died in Ireland. Their stories of suffering were never widely disseminated because few survived, and those who did were not literate and were often beholden to their masters. Instead, the story of the Raj was chronicled by the colonizers, swashbuckling accounts complete with fantastical palaces through which romped dashing cavalry officers, etc., etc. Only in the last few decades, due in the main to the diligence of Indian historians and academics, has a reliable picture emerged of the truly enormous scale of the economic devastation unleashed on India. This, to me, and you have elsewhere in the article, you talk about the role that, you know, the Irish, who were another, you know, colony effectively of Britain, you know, did have their impact on India in terms of soldiers, people who were given awards after the Sepoy Rebellion, Sepoy Mutiny, etc. But this issue of teaching history, of understanding one's own history, I found fascinating. you were in India until you were 23 before you left. So you went through your high school and college years there. Um, and but you did not learn about the true history of the impact of British rule, even though it was several years, decades after independence. In theory, my assumption would be that one of the first things that the government would do, even 5 years afterward, it's too quick, but within 10 years, 15 years, the government would have new textbooks and new kind of standards of education to teach your own history. But that didn't happen, right? Can
No,
you
it
talk
didn't.
about that?
Yeah, I'm very happy to talk about it, Neil. I mean, I'll just quickly tell you that the Irish involvement in India has spanned, 300 to 400 years. Our Irish people, Irish men were in India from day one, from when the East India Company was established. And that was because, a lot of Irish men would have come from large families, and if they happened to be the second, third, or fourth son, they had nothing to inherit, and so they were left to find their own fortunes, and a lot of them did. They sat for the civil service exams, which were held in Dublin, Belfast, and in Cork, and I'm talking about the 1600s, and they got the exams and they went out to India, and they made their fortunes in India, but they went to do every kind of second tier job. So, they ran the railways, they ran the port, they were in the customs, they ran the jute factories, the tea, wherever they were in the police. And so basically they kept the Raj going. And it is the most peculiar relationship that Irish people have had with India, because while they were, the second in command to the colonizers, they were colonized themselves by the very same people, by the British Empire. But the strange thing was that while this was going on, while Irishmen were there as part of the Raj, Irishmen also, raised funds, brought awareness to the Indian independence movement, were heavily involved, some of them in India, in the independence struggle. So it was a very strange, two-sided, or rather double-sided, I don't even know how to describe it, relationship, where they were the colonizers and yet they helped India fight for her freedom. And when just talking about how history is taught, so when Irish people suffered the famine and had to leave, they never let their story be forgotten. The Irish diaspora kept the story alive. The Indian diaspora had zero chance of doing that because they died in situ. They had no chance of migrating. There was nowhere they could go. A lot of them would have been very, very, very poor, illiterate, and they just died. They did not have a chance to tell their story. They didn't have a chance to get on a famine ship and leave like Irish people did. And then coming on to modern times, when I was growing up in India in school, we were never taught anything about the famines. It was all about how great the British were, and all the reforms, how every viceroy brought in these amazing reforms. And what were they? They were prison, reforms for prisoners who were there because they were fighting for freedom. So that kind of stuff. And it was all about. I wouldn't even say it wasn't deliberate. It was just that nobody had bothered changing the curriculum. That's my understanding of it, because now it has changed. In the last 10 or 15 years, the curriculum has changed, and no longer are we being told that, oh, look, they gave us the railways and they gave us the court system and all of that. But it actually, for me, it took reading Amitav Ghosh's book, The Sea of Poppies, for my eyes to be opened, and for me then to start looking around other books to see, what is it that I, where do I start? How do I learn my own history? How do I learn, India's history? Because living in Ireland, there's no escaping Irish history. Sure. Ireland really knows how to tell its history.
it's an interesting contrast in terms of the two cultures and kind of that understanding that you want that people should have. We have a few other folks who are watching. I want to make sure we get in this comment from Gerard Smith, who you might know. It's so wonderful to see and listen to Cauvery. Not only a beautiful writer, but so supportive of other writers. I can't wait to read The Inheritance. It's a wonderful comment.
I know Gerard, yes.
Yeah. How do you know Gerard? What's your connection?
We're Twitter mates.
Twitter mates. Absolutely. A lot of Twitter mates out there.
Yeah.
Mary Curtis is joining us. She's a journalist as well. She's been on the show. Always inspired by your guests. Learn something new. Tuning in from Charlotte, North Carolina.
Fantastic.
And my mom says great history of Indians and Irish in Ireland during the famine. Also great history of cross immigration. John actually left a comment as well. We might need to clarify this. India's fourth president, Vivagiri, I'm assuming studied law in Ireland, is what he was trying to say with that.
Yeah, he did.
Right?
He did.
Yeah. That's something. That's really great. So let's talk a little bit about, you have the Irish Times there with you.
I do actually, yes.
One of the questions I had was to get a sense of how is how is their U.S. elections, for example, being covered in the Irish newspaper? What are they saying about what's going on here?
Well, you'll be absolutely shocked. Like, so the Irish news is not the Irish coverage of American politics is not sort of just a brush over. It's very detailed. So today's Irish Times has Keith Duggan, who will I show you the paper? Will I hold it up?
Yeah, please do.
You can see it says, "I don't see a path for Trump without North Carolina." So it's very specific.
That's pretty detailed, yeah.
Yeah, very detailed. And then there's a little piece up above as well, but also by Keith Duggan, who's writing from America, and he says a neglected state suddenly feels crucial to the election. So that's the whole page is devoted to North Carolina and what's happening. So, it's interesting how Ireland is so obsessed with American politics. Irish people absolutely love reading and sort of listening to the analysis and about American politics. It's not just about will Trump win or will Kamala Harris win. It's about what's happening in North Carolina. It's that detailed.
And President Biden visited Ireland, right? As president, or
I don't think there's a president that hasn't. Every president makes that trip to Ireland. And I still remember when Barack Obama came, and and myself and my best friend at that time, she unfortunately died and passed away from with breast cancer.
I'm so sorry.
And we were absolutely obsessed with Obama, both of us. And when he came to Ireland, I still remember his the Marine One, the helicopter flew him from the president's the president's house in Dublin, in Phoenix Park, and he was going to his home village, Moneygall, and suddenly the cameras were tracking the plane. The TV show was tracking the plane. The helicopter, Marine One, and suddenly we realized, oh my God, he's actually flying over my house, and we ran out into the yard and we yelled and screamed at Marine One. We were like 15-year-old groupies. It was nuts.
That's great. Yeah. I want to. My mom left a comment. Thank you to Dr. Tolia for watching the show. I think she's referring to one of my uncles, Dr. Bhupendra Tolia. So thank you for watching. Always glad to have it. I think when you're watching on Facebook, you get notifications of who's watching, which friends of yours are also joining the show. But we don't know unless someone like my mom lets us know who's watching. Leave us a comment. Let us know where you're watching from so we can say hello to you properly. Let's see who else do we have. And then Tanka Dakal, listening about your writing process feels like personal. It is painful to have approaching deadline and not be able to start writing, even though having all the reporting done. But it is what it is. Absolutely. Writing is not for the faint of heart, I think, is in a general, my experience, both, not with writing fiction, but working as a journalist for a while. There's nothing that motivates you like a deadline. When and sometimes you go past that deadline just a little bit, depending on how forgiving your editors are. But it's a gruel. Even when I worked at a nonprofit, I worked with United Way for several years. We had a daily newsletter that I sent out to 14,000 people, and I had to wake up every morning and gather my thoughts, gather all the suggestions from colleagues, and cobble something together and hit send. It's definitely, like you were talking about, having a weekly column. That's that's a grind. You have to keep doing it. You have to keep thinking about, what are you doing next? What are you putting out?
Yeah, you're right, Neil. And luckily for me, the paper and me decided at the same time that it was enough. So we had a happy parting. It wasn't, I wasn't disappointed.
That's good.
Yeah,
That's good.
yeah.
Well, let's make a few quick announcements before we transition to the newspaper, and of course we'll come back and talk about your book and other topics. And there might be some Ireland might feature in the newspaper as well, so we'll keep the focus. But we want to do a shout out, a thank you to our sponsor, Muckrack. They've been a longtime sponsor of Sri's shows, so we appreciate all of their support. And we also want to recognize that the show is produced by Digimentors, the consulting firm that Sri started. We focus on digital marketing, events, digital programs, strategic communications, trainings, and workshops. We also help with staffing and recruitment. I'm proud to be a vice president of events and communications at Digimentors. As you know, as you see, we also do a lot of work on AI, running workshops, helping with policy, etc. This is a slide that shows when Sri started teaching workshops on how to use the web. You see, in 1998, he had hair. And in 2023, last year, he started teaching workshops on generative AI. And he has lost most of his hair at this point. He knows I like to tease him about that. Particularly because I still have most of mine, although I feel my forehead getting bigger every day. But if you're interested in learning more about Sri's workshops, please visit our website, and you can go to digimentors.group/SriAI, digimentors.group/SriAI to learn more. We'd certainly love to be able to organize something for you and or your colleagues. There are various uses, various ways that we can talk about AI. I also want to do a plug for our show, Shining Light on Shadows, a candid conversation about mental health. We're up to episode 15. Dr. Rochelle Kritzer will be our guest on Thursday. She's going to be talking about the importance of community support, groups like NAMI, etc. You won't want to miss this. She'll also share some of her own personal experiences and her work as a school psychologist for 30 years. So it'll be a great show. Our last episode, folks will know Stefan Kaplan, who's watching and who's a friend of the show, a Digimentors colleague. He was our guest back in August. Nature is the best medicine. So we certainly encourage you to join us for that. I do want to take a moment for folks who may have missed our last New York Times read along with Mike Riley. It was a great conversation about AI. Let's just take a quick 2-minute break to watch his closing remarks, because I think you'll find it interesting. And then after that, we'll come back and dig into the paper. Here's Mike Riley talking about AI.
Sure. Thanks, guys, for having me on. This was wonderful. Great way to start off a Sunday. It's just except for the house alarm going off. That was crazy of all the times to have that happen. But as far as tips with AI, approach it with cautious curiosity is what I call it. Experiment with it, use it. Don't stick your head in the sand and say, "Oh, I'm terrified of this technology." work with it, experiment with it. Take one of the free online classes through ONA, Online News Association. You can sign up for them if you're an ONA member at journalist.org. They're free. We're going to be doing some all through the fall. We're just doing some planning for fall and spring. And join their ONA AI collective. That's free as well, whether you're a journalist or not. It's got a lot of useful sites and helpful tips. One thing, and this is going to be the big elephant in the room this fall, is a new tool that's coming called Sora, S-O-R-A. Sora is created by OpenAI, the folks that brought you ChatGPT, and it'll allow you to create lifelike videos up to 10 minutes long and possibly longer, doing nothing but writing a prompt. They're very realistic looking, very difficult to tell the difference between an AI generated video in reality. It's only going to get smarter as it comes out of beta. You can actually see her reflection in the puddles as she walks. There's one down at the bottom of a Jeep rolling through the dirt road. Outside of some pixelation in the rocks and in the trees, there's no way you can tell that's AI generated. So you're going to see a lot more of this coming. It's why we had the writer strike and the actor strike last so long. One of the big concerns people had was their likeness being replicated in AI. So the tools are getting smarter, getting better, and that can be very good, but also very bad if they're in the hands of some bad actors. So buyer beware, but do experiment and work with it. Experiment with it and work with it. It's going to be part of our life moving forward. This was predicted 40 years ago in the Terminator movie with Linda Hamilton, where she tells the hero, she goes, well, that technology doesn't exist yet. And he told her in 40 years it will. And that movie was made in 1984. It's now 40 years later, and that technology does exist.
So that was Mike Riley talking about AI. And we want to make sure, in case you missed it, that was a short clip from the show. We also want to, share with you the news about the Jaipur Literary Festival that we're very excited to be working with in the spirit of what Tina Brown called the greatest literary show on earth, which is high praise, I would say. It's coming to 5 American cities this month. They're in Houston today, if you're interested, but they'll be in New York this week, September 9 through 11. They'll be in Colorado, September 13 through 15, and Seattle, new additions for them, September 20 and 22 in Seattle, and 27 and 28 of September in North Carolina. And Cauvery had a blurb from the director of the Jaipur Literary Festival, and I thought that was really great. We want to pull that back up. Namita Gokhale said, if you missed this earlier, the geographical and historical vista of this extraordinary novel is breathtaking. The Inheritance holds the past and the present in its embrace through its intertwined narratives. It evokes the lilt and landscape of Beira and carries a cast of unforgettable characters, a book to be read, reread, and cherished. That's from the director of the Jaipur Literary Festival. And you're invited to speak. Is it in Jaipur itself?
Yeah, Neil, I'm going to Jaipur. You can see I'm grinning from year to year. Just it's so wonderful to even have that read out to me back again. I'll be at the Jaipur Literary Festival in January 25.
That's incredible. Incredible. So folks have a chance to see it in multiple cities in the U.S. if you can. Again, today in Houston, but also in New York, Colorado, North Carolina, and Seattle in the upcoming weeks. And we'll share a link to that in our in Facebook. But again, if you're interested, it is you can find them at hashtag JLFUSA, at JLF International. JLFLitfest.org is their website. And look for, when you click on the site and look for events, look for the Americas, because that'll show you the events in the U.S. So with that, we would like to move on. It's 9:30 on the dot. Okay, a little later maybe than we would have hoped, maybe 9:20, but we still have a half hour to cover the paper. So Cauvery, we'll turn our attention to the New York Times, and we'll ask you to follow along with us. And if there are specific stories that we skip over, that you want us to talk about, please make sure to stop me, and we'll definitely do that. And John Lee, thank you very much, sharing a link to the Amazon page for Cauvery's book while I am hosting solo. Thank you for that help, John. Really appreciate that.
Thank you for me as well.
Great job. Ron Thomas says hello from Dubai as well. And Irish Stew Podcast shared a link to your interview with them. So we're coming full circle. I'll come back on camera because we have so many great people watching. Loretta says, "Good seeing you, Cauvery. It was such a pleasure meeting you in Ireland." So that must be nice.
Yes.
And Rose says, "Such an interesting conversation. I loved reading The Covenant of Water by Abraham Verghese. One of the characters in the novel is Digby Kilgore, a physician who is unable to get the training he needs in Scotland because of his Catholic religion, joins the Indian Medical Service." So interesting connections there. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn our attention to the newspaper, and Cauvery, we will follow along. We looked at the front page earlier, so we'll flip through the A book, as it's called. The Inside the Times, my favorite section, in China, searching for sparks of twilight love. Sometimes the most rewarding stories to tell are the ones you don't set out to find. That's how I felt about my recent article on lonely seniors in Shanghai looking for love. There is a great piece they do on the inside, on page 3, the Dateline, where Times journalists are reporting from around the world. Here they're highlighting Venezuela, Maine, Albania, and Indonesia. You can see on the map. And then there's this piece from David Dunlap. It's actually written by John Otis this time, an artifact from the morgue at the Times Clippings Library. A 1963 Newsday article on Sina, a faux nonprofit that aimed to clothe animals. That's going to be an interesting piece to read later. So let's take a look at what's in the paper. International news. The world really needs priests now. Celebrating Mass 2 weeks ago at St. Paul Major Seminary on Flores, an island in Indonesia, where 70% of the 2 million residents are Roman Catholic. This story, family seeks own inquiry after killing at a protest. This is the American woman who was shot in the West Bank. She was a graduate of the University of Washington in Seattle, where my wife got her PhD, where we lived for 15 years. It was certainly disturbing to see that. It seems like she was intentionally targeted. Nurses gain wider role as strike hurts hospitals. South Korea shaken by doctors' walkout. Polio vaccine was altered. Sorry, Cauvery, go ahead.
That story from Indonesia, about the priests. I mean, that is actually the situation in Ireland as well. So, in Ireland, there's been such I think only 2 or 3 priests were ordained in the whole of Ireland last year. And, a lot of Irish parishes now have priests from India, from the Far East, Southeast Asia, from Africa, from Nigeria. So that situation has impacted Ireland hugely.
And one of the things that I do have to mention, I remember seeing a headline. I don't know whether it was in the New York Times or elsewhere, but at the same time, Cauvery, there was a headline of how the Catholic Church was moving priests around, moving priests to the South Pacific, to isolated islands, who were accused of abusing children. That was the way they were moving people outside of areas. It's a very difficult story.
Yes, that story actually is just broken in Ireland because, once again, not just now, but once again, because the actual numbers of children that were abused, the actual schools, all of that has been listed, and that story broke a week ago, and it's still consumed the whole country with horror, shame.
Did that extend to Ireland in terms of moving priests?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, priests were moved from parish to parish, totally, fully in the knowledge that they were abusing.
Parish to parish. I think we knew parish to parish, but this particular article talked about how they moved them to isolated communities in the South Pacific. I mean, you couldn't get farther from.
Yeah.
But thank you for sharing that what it was like for folks in Ireland as well. There's an article about the polio vaccine was altered and disease surged. This is polio's making, unfortunately, a comeback in Gaza, and the war there certainly is not helping. Iran provided weapons to Russia, officials say. And former British leader's new book could serve as a manual for Starmer. The new prime minister, Tony Blair, offers his advice to his successors. There's an article about explaining the gesturing of apes. And then here's an article about India. We'll take a look at this. Cow vigilantes, in quotes at least, leave India's Muslims on edge. Election has not eased sectarian tensions. And then just below the fold, fears persist that the recent attacks by Hindus will not let up. Recent series of attacks by Hindus on Muslims in India have highlighted how sectarian violence remains a serious problem, even as the country seeks to define itself on the world stage as a robust democracy with equal rights for all.
Well, I mean, equal rights for all is a joke. Unfortunately, that is not the case in India. And I feel so strongly about it because, when I left India, it was truly the world's largest secular democracy. Can't say that anymore of itself.
Absolutely. It is really disturbing where India's kind of where the politics have gone from such inspirational beginnings with the tryst with destiny back in 1947 to now. It is really, as someone observing, as a second generation, first generation born in the U.S., it's still something that one could look back with pride on in terms of at least India when I was growing up and coming of age in high school years, 80s, 90s, before the BJP, before Modi. It's at this point it's frightening, not just embarrassing, but it's frightening what's going on there.
But there is a little flicker of hope because I think people in India are fed up and they've realized, that this whole stirring up of communal tension has only served the politicians. It hasn't served the country. The fact that, in Ayodhya, they spoke at the ballot box, and people in Ayodhya were sick of it, and this is supposed to be the heartland of that, the Hindutva movement. And, it is actually so, if any of these, these diehard Hindutva supporters would just stop and think, like, what would Lord Ram, who they worship, what would he think of them?
Well, that's the same question can be asked of a lot of
other religions,
conservative, very, very conservative Christians. What would Jesus say when you turn people away, when you are just showing anything, not anything but love toward people who are gay or trans, etc., much less immigrants,
or people of another religion,
etc.
Because in India, what's happened is that the Hindutva movement has made it out that the bogeyman for the poor people of India, the ordinary man on the street, they've made out Muslims as the bogeyman.
Yes,
which is so far from the truth. The bogeyman is just richer people, high caste rich people. They are the bogeyman, for everyday ordinary Indians, because everyday ordinary Indians haven't a hope, if when they come face to face in any confrontational situation with a person who is richer or of a higher caste.
And Dr. Tachi is sharing, indeed, at some point when people are tired enough of their condition, they will change their condition. It gave me a little bit of hope, Cauvery. The idea that the BJP may not be in power at some point, it almost feels like it's a long-term proposition, but maybe at some point things can turn over. Obviously, a lot has to happen before we get there. Let's keep looking at the paper. There is their two-page spread in between, and a little bit hard to see in terms of with the paper, but there's a full-page ad from Italy with love from Bloomingdale's, and then this full, so it's a full centerfold, and then the right, maybe it was nostalgia, maybe it was wanderlust, or maybe it was something closer to amore. For countless reasons, Italy's always topped our favorite places list, and so enticed by its exquisite craftsmanship and impeccable design, we set out to discover the most incredible styles and unique finds from its shores. The result is an elaborate tribute to the La Dolce Vita with over 300 exclusives, exciting collaborations, designer pop-ups, and new launches we can't wait for you to see. From Italy with love, now at Bloomingdale's. We always take a moment to look at the ads just to see what is coming across. There's this full-page spread inside about female cutting in Gambia, about this 97-year-old woman who wouldn't stop the practice and was the first person arrested. In the U.S. National news, Maine fishing town fights to save itself from nature's rage after extreme storms shoring up wharves, roads, and buildings. Here's a bit about the space station and the bottom half of the paper. This is an article. We'll show this to you here. In Sea of Affluence, keeping courtside order and quelling occasional tantrums. The ushers that have to work with folks who are at the U.S. Open, keep them in line. We have more U.S. news. Lax rules add to risk of drug-laced candy. And inquiry into the New York City mayor's office and his colleagues. Then the U.S. politics, of course, in his final months as president, Biden is both liberated and resigned. I always it's always interesting to me because the way that the Times gets printed, I'm going to try and show this to you. In New York, the printing press, which I had the pleasure of visiting with Michael Connors, can print the full paper, going up to 28 pages. But the way the New York Times is distributed around the country in the U.S., there are about 27 different local presses. In this case, the Washington Post, for where I live, prints the paper for the New York Times and does delivery. They can't handle the long sections, so you almost get like a second section from the front page. And this is the highlighted article here. If a threat is not a crime, can the police prevent a school shooting? This is about the shooting, in Georgia. And that's something that, it's just incredible. Cauvery, what is the, when the school shootings, which come up more often than we'd like in the U.S., how is that covered in Ireland? What do people outside the world think when they see this happening in the U.S.?
I mean, people in the world, I think people outside the U.S. are just so incredulous, that this happens because, I mean, there are children all over the world, people all over the world who are disaffected or, unhappy or suffer from depression or have some kind of rage, but they don't go around shooting children in school. Like, I mean, when you send your child to school in Ireland, that is not a fear that you have at all. So it's incredulous, that's the feeling. And every time it happens, the feeling of, incredulity just increases. That how can Americans just let this happen to themselves? How can they let this happen to their children? it's just beggars belief. And I think I'm speaking for everybody in Ireland.
It is incredible. I mean, our daughter is 11. They do lockdown drills in school, and they're used to it by now. And in fact, like they did a drill, and the teacher went to go open the door prematurely, and the students had to. He's a new teacher, so he's still learning. The students had to tell him, no, stay back. We didn't get the all clear yet.
Yeah,
it is heartbreaking.
yeah, and you wonder how much of that affects mental health, because if you're going to school every day, I mean, children nowadays are well informed. They see it on their phones. They watch television. They know exactly what they're up for every day when they go to school. So that must hugely affect children's mental health in the US.
Sure, absolutely. We review the obits on the New York Times Read Along. We're a big fan, and I've always been a big fan as well. You can learn so much in terms of history and personalities. Here is a above the fold. Michael Lerner, 81, founder of a combative Jewish magazine, Jewish Renewal, has died. The caption here: Rabbi Lerner and his wife Nan Fink founded Tikkun in 1986. Right at the memorial for Muhammad Ali in Louisville, Kentucky in 2016. Below the fold, though, and I want to make sure you see this, Nell McCafferty, 80, Irish journalist who pushed her country to change, passed away. Reputation has shifted from a dangerous iconoclast to a national treasure. Tell us about Nell McCafferty.
So Nell McCafferty is much beloved of Ireland. And there was such an outpouring of grief when she passed away, because she was truly a pioneer of her time, and of pioneer of the ages, because she was the one who was, I think her trips in the 1971, to Belfast, which was called the contraceptive train, to bring contraceptives which were legal in Belfast but not legal in the south of Ireland, in the Republic. So it started with that, and then she fought for the rights of everybody who was the minority group, whether it was gay and lesbian groups, transgender people. Yeah, she was somebody who stirred it up and questioned and demanded that there be change. So Irish women have so much that they owe to her, and people like her who sort of defied the church, defied society at that time. Yeah, she was much beloved of Ireland.
That's great, and the Times has been making an effort in recent years to give write obituaries for people that maybe are outside the their universe earlier. There's a great, we had Amy Padnani, who is a journalist at the Times on the obits desk. She actually wrote a book called Overlooked, and this is, I would like to think this is part of that. I mean, just to look into Ireland, to look outside the U.S., to make sure that we tell the stories of people kind of outside our own little circle, I think is very important. Irish Stew, watching on YouTube, Ireland's leading columnist Fintan O'Toole tells the story of the contraceptive train in his recent memoir. So you're talking about that challenge of getting contraceptives when they were were they outright banned or just
it was illegal.
It was illegal completely. Yeah. Very fascinating. Going back to some of the other comments, Mary Curtis says that she just hosted a Slate What Next podcast on the shooting in Georgia. In Georgia, there's no law against giving your 14-year-old an AR-15 for Christmas. The state is proud of its lax laws. That is just incredible. That's how the shooter got his AR-15. His father gave it to him as a gift, which is just incredible. And Dr. Sojana Chandrasekhar in the U.S., one of the presidential candidates, calling us immigrants the poison in society, which is just it's very difficult to be here. And we're looking at the elections. It was bad enough when Trump won in 2020. The idea that he might be reelected, that people, after seeing him in office and what he will do, and he's not, they're not hiding it. They're not, trying to kind of talk in code. They're being very explicit about what they're going to do. And there's still people who are willing to vote for him. It just doesn't make sense. Do you have an extra bedroom in case, Cauvery, in case we need to leave quickly?
Yeah, it's, I mean, it's, as I was saying to you earlier on, that the whole Trump phenomenon, it can't even be explained, because, the very first thing he said when he came down that blooming escalator should have completely canceled him.
Yes.
And yet he went on to, from strength to strength. It's almost like, people are kind of hypnotized. I mean, I can't tell you how much of time is spent, amongst friends here in Ireland, just analyzing, psychoanalyzing Americans, and wondering why, what is it that they see in him? Like, even if you're, and I mean, the only thing that you can understand is if you're disenfranchised, you will then, sort of like a moth to a flame, will go to whoever's sort of offering you kind of temporary relief, even if it's just words.
Yeah. We are approaching the end of our show. We still have a few minutes left with the Cauvery, so we're going to give her a little break. We're going to take her off screen. We're going to do a few announcements, and then we're going to bring her back from some closing thoughts. So, Cauvery, thank you very much. Get a glass of water. I have my water here. I want to show everyone that I'm drinking it.
Your mom, especially.
Oh, is it that was from my mom? Mom, I'm drinking water. But we will make a few announcements, and then we'll bring back Cauvery for some closing thoughts. Again, my name is Neil Parekh. I am always thrilled to be the guest host of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. If you joined the show late, you can always watch it from the beginning on the same channels that you're watching on now, on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and our Digimentor's website. We'll also be uploading the video to Instagram. It just takes a little bit longer to put that up there. But please feel free to watch it from the beginning for a fascinating conversation we had with Cauvery. If you'd like to be added to our mailing list, please send me an email, neil@digimentors.group. We send out, usually one email a week, occasionally two, to make sure that give you a reminder about the show and to give you the links on where to watch. So again, you can email me, neil@digimentors.group, neil@digimentors.group, or reach out on any of our social channels, and we'll make sure to add you to the list. As I mentioned earlier, the show is produced by Digimentors, the consulting firm that Sri started with his friend Andrew Lee. And we are proud to get support from Muckrack for all of the work that we're doing. Next week's guest is Eric Weiner. He is the author of Ben and Me, In Search of a Founder's Formula for a Long and Useful Life. Ben Franklin is the subject of his new book. We're looking forward to having him join the show next week on September 15th. And another show that we want to make sure you know about, Shining Light on Shadows, a candid conversation about mental health. Dr. Rochelle Kritzer will be our guest. We'll be talking about the importance of community support, particularly groups like NAMI, the National Alliance for Mentally Ill, mental illness, rather. And as our final few announcements, we just want to make sure you know about the Jaipur Literary Festival. It is coming to New York, September 9th and 11th of this week. It'll be in Colorado, September 13th and 15th. And it'll be in Seattle, September 20th and 22nd. It'll be in North Carolina, September 27th and 28th. Cauvery will be a speaker at the Jaipur, and I'm going to underscore Jaipur Literary Festival in Jaipur in 2025. So we are very excited about that. It's a conference that Tina Brown called the greatest literary show on earth, which is incredibly high praise, and it's coming to the U.S. So you definitely won't want to miss that. Let's bring back Cauvery for some closing thoughts. And Cauvery, I'm going to start with just the praise that you had from your book, again, by the director of the Jaipur Literary Festival, Namita Gokhale. The geographical and historical vista of this extraordinary novel is breathtaking. The inheritance holds the past and the present in its embrace through its intertwined narratives. It evokes the lilt and landscape of Beara and carries a cast of unforgettable characters. A book to be read, reread, and cherished. But if that wasn't enough, Graham Norton, a story brimful of love and the power of forgiveness. I loved seeing West Cork through Cauvery's eyes. I hope it is a huge success. And Donal Ryan, I just finished The Inheritance. It's so beautiful. My heart was beating out of my chest as they searched for Sully at the end, and as he emerged from the ivy, I shouted, "Oh, thank God," out loud. I absolutely love this novel. Cauvery, we covered a lot of ground today. We talked about your work. We talked about being Indian in Ireland. Can you share some closing thoughts with us? Tell us a little bit more about your work, your writing, and what it means to be Indian in Ireland.
My work and my writing. So I suppose I'm happiest when I'm writing. When I'm not writing, I am quite a unhappy, grumpy person. So I think that's what keeps me writing. Just to remain happy and cheerful. To be a writer in Ireland is really, it's a dream, because Irish people, anywhere else in the world, if you are asked, if you say that you're a writer, if you have the guts to say that you're a writer anywhere else in the world, people immediately ask you, who publishes you? But in Ireland, when you say you're a writer, the first thing people say is, what do you write? And, that whole attitude is so fantastic. And, from the government downwards, there's such a huge support for the arts in Ireland. People recognize it as a completely noble, nearly noble thing to do, is to write or to create, whether it be, painting, poetry, whatever. It's a great country to live in if you are in the creative arts. And I'd also just like to say at the end, Neil, to everybody listening and anyone who might tune in later on, please support your libraries, please support independent bookshops, and please support independent publishing houses. There's such great work coming out of smaller publishers, and it's really vital to support independent publishers and independent bookshops. They're the lifeblood, really, of writers and writing.
Well said, Cauvery. Well said. I still remember the bookshop in my hometown. I think they closed several years ago, but Good Yarns bookstore. I spent a lot of time there, and I certainly supporting libraries, supporting local bookstores. We also subscribe to a newspaper. It doesn't have to be the New York Times. Support your local newspaper. Local journalism is often the only organization holding local elected officials to account. The school board, the city council, and so these are all important words and important instructions for us all. I want to share a few quick comments before we close, because we have a lot of interesting folks. Irish Stew actually asked a question, and I want to see if you have any thoughts on this. Speaking of poisonous ideas, we'd be interested in Cauvery's views on the Irish far right. Are you willing to talk about the Irish far right?
Yeah, and I think with the with the Irish far right, like the far right anywhere else in the world, it's very easy to dismiss them as a minority. But I think our fears about the far right have to be addressed. There's no point in saying, oh, they're just the minority, they'll go away, or we're better than that. There's no point in just saying stuff like we're better than that. The issues that they raise, the way they raise them, all of that has to be tackled. I think the way the UK tackled people who rioted so quickly and with fairly severe sentences is the way forward. I mean, hate has to be dealt with. You can't just push it to some corner.
Yes. Well, and it's interesting because Mary Curtis says that 8 years of resentment of a black president here in the States, Obama, primed the country for Trump. Now the idea of a black and Asian woman has ramped up insecurities, anxiety about a changing country, and yes, racism and misogyny. So it's something you can't let it fester. You have to nip it in the bud. Absolutely. Dr. Chandrasekhar endorsed the idea of libraries, independent bookshops, independent publishers. Absolutely. My mom says, thank you for sharing your knowledge and history. So we appreciate that. Diana Rohini, watching from California, Trumpism, out of control gun violence, and extremists at the school board level have me rethinking my family's place in America. Not sure we will stay in the States much longer. This election will greatly impact us. Thanks for talking about these important issues. And Diana, I know that there was an article in the Times, we didn't get to it, about people choosing to live abroad and what that experience has been like. So if you're not a subscriber, send me a note and I will make sure to send you that link. It might be worth taking a look at. I think we'll close with John's comment, and I'm just going to leave this right here and frame it. Maybe I won't host anymore. I won't. I don't know if I can do better than this. Nicely done, Neil. Sri will have to fight to get his seat back. That's high praise, John. Thank you so much. I'm going to let everyone just pause for a moment. Cauvery, look at the camera and smile. Because I'm going to get a nice screenshot of this in the middle of the show. It's hard to go back and find it. I'm going to have to send this to Sri, and I guess these are fighting words in some places. But no, it's always a pleasure, John. Thank you so much for that praise. As I mentioned earlier, it is always an honor and a privilege to sit in the big chair, to do the guest hosting responsibilities. It's a fascinating discussion. Cauvery, thank you so much for everything that you brought to us today, from your writing, your book, The Inheritance. Again, in case people missed it, it is available on Amazon. We're going to clear up this issue of when you can get the book, but there's been some incredible praise for the book ahead of time. Again, Cauvery, this is not her first book. She's also the author of The Uncoupling, Paddy Indian, and The Tainted. So we certainly want to wish you luck. We hope you'll continue to watch the show and continue to share. Thank you. If you have other colleagues who you think might be a good guest, John, if you're interested in being a guest on our show, let us know. We'd love to have you. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a good Sunday. We'll see you next week at the same time, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, 1:30 p.m. Irish Time. Thank you very much, and have a great week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.